So we're talking about the journey to adult services. Um, it's called a lot of different things, and that can in itself can be quite confusing. Some people just know it as transition, some people just know it as transfer. We'll go a little bit further into that a bit further on in the talk. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to call it the journey to adult services, because it is and should be a journey and not just one kind of moment where they just swap on over to the adult services. Here we go. So young people go through, as you all know, your parents of young people, many transitions in life. Unfortunately, a great deal of them tend to happen at the same time, which can make it a little bit harder to manage. But they'll go through transitions in those teen years, educationally, physically, emotionally, lots of different things going on. For someone that is heart healthy, a young person that's heart healthy, but if you've got a single ventricle heart on top of this, you've also got that transition medically where you move from your pediatric service and your pediatric team to a brand new team at the adult hospital, and it's just another thing that they have to kind of get their head around, understand, prepare for, and then deal with itself. So there's a lot going on in that small period of time. So with hospital transition, what clinics, cardiac units across the country should be doing is starting to mention transfer from the age of 12. So it becomes less of a shock. It becomes normal language and an expectation in those coming years for a young person. Doesn't always happen, but that's what we're trying to get to the point of. But what does it actually mean to transition and transfer? Because it is quite a big process with lots of things going on, and there's lots of things that we can do to make it easier. Lots of things that you as parents can do to make it easier. And lots of things that the units should be doing to make that easier as well, including listening to the young person and what their actual worries are. But we'll get into that as well. So what is transition versus transfer? It might be the first time that you've heard the word transfer used. It might be that you haven't heard transition used in this context before, but in many other contexts. But in this particular context, what is the difference between transition and transfer? So the transition itself is also, it can be called the journey as such, from the moment in which it starts being mentioned in units or at home, to the different things that we can do to make it manageable and less scary for the young person, to the actual transfer of care, so the transfer from pediatric unit to the adult unit, and then further on from that as well, the support that the young person needs, wants, and should get once they're in adult. It shouldn't be a case of, oh, you're over in adults now, well done, you should know everything, go. It's kind of prolonging that support so that they feel completely knowledgeable and confident when they're in the adult unit itself. So the transition is the whole journey, and the transfer is the one event in which they move, that time that they have that first appointment at the adult unit itself, that transfer of care. Transfer of care is a really positive thing for a young person. It could be scary, it can be daunting, lots of unknown, but it is a really positive thing because they're moving on to a team that then specialize in the questions they might have as a young adult, that possibly the pediatrics aren't as specialist in. But if the people around them are struggling to understand or come to terms with it, then they might struggle with it too. And so I like to see it as a transition and a transfer for the parent as well, because you shouldn't be left behind. You kind of accompany them on the journey. You've been with them, keeping them alive, getting them to their hospital appointments up until that point. So it shouldn't be a case of, okay, they're at adult service now, see you later. You should be with them on that journey. So you being more informed and knowing what's coming and being a part of that journey will make it a lot easier for the young person as well. A good idea to do this is to drip feed independence in the pediatric environment itself, as it makes the transfer and the whole journey around it smoother. And what we mean by that is that when they move to adult services, you'll notice that the clinician, that the cardiologist, the specialist nurse will be directing more of their questions and their conversation to the young person. And that's absolutely normal. That's by no means means that they don't think that your input is as important. It doesn't mean that they don't want you there. It's just the natural progression to kind of create that independence for that young person. But it can be quite daunting, especially if it's not something that they're used to doing. Suddenly they're in a brand new environment with a brand new team that they don't know, and those questions are new as well. So when we say drip feed, that independence in the paediatric unit is if you're in you're in clinic with them, or you're at one of their appointments with them, and there's a question that maybe they can answer, passing on the reins in that one moment for that one question, and kind of really being that supportive hand behind them, starting to claim that independence with the little bits that they do know and they feel comfortable with. So that way, when they move to the adult services, having a question aimed at them, or kind of having that voice in that room, will be less of a new thing on top of all the newness. So people see the age 12. So whilst the journey or the transition may start at 12, the transfer probably won't, because 12, I know if a lot of people are like, that's too young, they shouldn't be moving to adults at that age. That's not what we're saying. We're saying at 12, the conversation might start. So, in a few years' time, in so many years' time, you'll be moving to adults. So what do you know about the heart condition? Do you understand your medication? Kind of drip feeding that information in, because we found that so many of our young people cope with the transfer to adults if it doesn't seem like a complete shock. So that's what we mean by the transition starting at 12, starting to talk about it. So when it does come, and supporting them around that. So when it does come, it's less of a surprise, less of a shock to the system. So that's the difference between transition and transfer. Transition is the whole journey and the support around it, and then the transfer is the actual move and the transfer of care. So the journey itself, like I've just said, I'm rushing ahead of myself as I always do. When asked, youth members that were involved in the journey found the journey with a transfer, if they were engaged more and they were involved more, they felt like they had a better experience. They felt the feeling of continued support and foresight led to empowerment and confidence, which we know it does. Each young person is very, very different. That's always something to bear in mind. Some young people answering one question is enough for them, and that's fine, but it's still that drip feeding of independence. The conversation might not be something that they're comfortable having with their team, because they might be quite an inward young person. That's fine. It just means that as a parent, you just take that conversation into the home where they feel safe, and kind of talk about it there once you've asked your questions of the clinician. So it's, as long as they feel empowered and informed, that should create an increase in confidence, so that they kind of can deal with that transfer, because it is really scary for our young people. We're not saying that it's going to make it a completely smooth ride and everything will be fine, because we know that there are bumps in the road. We know that young people find change sometimes quite daunting. Some young people find it really, really cool. They want to be in charge, and they want to kind of storm ahead, but that's all to do with personality type. It's about finding what's right for your young person. More so over COVID, but previous and since as well, unfortunately, some young people had no transitional journey whatsoever. I've worked with young people around the country that just got a letter in the post that says your next appointment will be at an adult unit, and that was their whole hospital transition and transfer experience. So they didn't get that hand holding, they didn't get that support, they didn't get that information or the opportunity to grow confidence. And when that happened, they felt really unprepared, they felt rushed, and they felt really anxious about it. So I'm trying to work with the units around the country to avoid that happening. Obviously during COVID, it was something that couldn't be helped, I guess. but certainly now it should not be happening. So it's just kind of making that whole journey as comfortable as possible, as informed as possible, and ensuring the young people feel like they've got a voice in that moment, because it's very, very important. So when we talk about the fears, I'm going to explain why I've popped this in here. I have assisted and supported units across the country in their transition transfer events. And when I do, they're brilliant. They're great events that the young people take a lot from. But the concerns and that the teams have, the medical teams have, don't necessarily match up with the fears and the concerns that the young people have. So I've been working with those teams to try and marry those two perspectives a little bit more, and ensure that when they're doing it in a youth-friendly way, i.e., possibly not talking about sex in front of lots of people they've never met before and their parents. Same with drug use. Endocarditis is really, really important, but it's probably not in the top 10 of what the young person is worried about when they transfer. But it's definitely in the top 3 talks that every unit gives, because it's a concern of the medical team. So it's about finding the right point of bringing things in for the young people and addressing their fears of the transfer first and foremost, so that they feel comfortable enough to then engage about the other things that the medical staff are doing. So I kind of spoke to a lot of young people about what their actual fears were, and this is what we got. And it's quite nice to know what the general kind of ideology is around that, because it's quite hard to get young people to talk about their fears, because then that makes them vulnerable. But these are the kind of things that the young people are saying that they're nervous about when it comes to transition and transfer. Will this new team know me? What if I don't like them? So for many young people, they've had the same team since they were very, very, very young, born even in some cases, and they know the team, they trust the team, but so do the parents. Their parents know that these are the people that have, saved their child. So there's a lot of trust within their paediatric care team, in the majority of cases. So moving to a new team is scary, or the idea of having to build that trust and that connection with a new team all over again can be quite daunting, and it's not necessarily something that the medical teams focus on. So trying to alleviate any fears and concerns, and letting the young people know that the questions that they have will change as they get older, and they start to question what their capabilities are as a young adult, what their options are in certain areas. And this new team, though it doesn't have that trust that you've had so far, because they haven't had the opportunity to build it, are specialists in that area. So it's a good idea to kind of go in with an open mind and create that trust and build that trust and that relationship with them. But as a young person, the idea of new people is very, very scary. A lot of young people are scared of answering wrong in their appointments. They feel like the questions that they're being asked are more of a test than the staff, the medical teams trying to find out what's going on. And it's, reassuring them that it's not a test. If they don't know certain things, it's okay. It's an opportunity to learn in that moment. They're not going to come out of their appointment in adults with, you failed this appointment. That's not what the team are trying to do. They're being asked questions now to try and increase confidence and independence, but there's no wrong answer. It's not a test, but that is a fear of a lot of the young people. A lot of the young people feel that this is happening really, really quickly. They've been at their peds for such a long time. And, with some young people, it might actually be a really, really quick journey. We say that it's good to start at 12, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the units will start at 12. It might be that they start bringing up that conversation at 15, 16, and then all of a sudden they're moving. So it can feel like it's happening really, really quickly. So that's why, if you've got a young person or a child that's 12, 13, if the units aren't talking about it, that's okay. It's an opportunity for you to start, you know, dropping it in conversation at home so it doesn't feel like it's happening really, really quickly. Embarrassing questions, you know, because they're at that age where they'll start being asked about contraception, they'll start being asked about family planning, they'll start being asked about all these kind of things that teenagers find embarrassing. They're embarrassing subject matters, and they might want you in the appointment with them, which so many of our young people when they transition do, and you're absolutely within your right to ask that. No one should be saying the parent shouldn't be there point blank. That's a myth that I want to bust now, which, you know, is all you can see at top left is also a fear. But there might be some times or some moments within an appointment that the team might say, can I just speak to Sarah one-to-one about something, because it's something they might find embarrassing and they don't want to talk in front of people, but it's really important that the cardiologist or the nurse or whoever they're seeing gives them the correct information. So I guess as a parent, it's not to take that personally. No one's trying to remove you from the care plan. No one's saying that you're not important anymore. You're absolutely important and you should be on this journey with them. It's just as they get a little bit older, there might be some moments that the doctor just wants to speak one-to-one with these young people. Weirdly enough, one of the number one fears from the majority of the young people is if the hospital will be filled with old people. And this took me by surprise. It took a lot of the hospital's teams by surprise as well, as a number one fear. But if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, but we can't know this until we speak to the young people. So they're expecting these adult hospitals, and in some cases they are, to be filled with people in their 70s and their 80s, especially in the cardiac department, that have maybe got acquired heart disease, because that's the stereotypical kind of thought process behind it, and they don't want to be surrounded by old people, because it kind of makes them, not kind of, I know it does because they've told me, it makes them feel a little bit more different to their peers than they did before. If they see only older people in the unit and not many younger people, the people that they consider their peers seem that much more further away. And also between me and you, they're really worried about the way that old people smell in the hospital. So it's about having those conversations and turn it into a little bit of a joke, make it an inside joke, so it becomes less of a fear and more of something that's humorous. A really, really important thing. I had a young person say, my mom doesn't think I'm ready, so I can't be. And it just shows the impact of a parent in this situation, and why it's so important for you as the parent or carer to be on that journey with them, so that you feel ready, so that you feel like they're ready, but also so that you know the importance that if you're worried about it, and it's totally normal to be worried about it, FYI, but you don't kind of spread that worry onto the young person, because trust me, they're already nervous. So yeah, so these are the actual fears that the young people would come to us, and they're very, very different to what the units were kind of giving talks on, or, you know, reassuring them about, because they didn't think that these would be the things that 16, 17-year-olds will be worried about, but they are. And their voice needs to be heard, and the transition journey needs to kind of be molded according to that, because it is, you know, member specific, and we need to make sure that each individual young person has a journey that is fitting for them. This is a workshop I did with some young people, and I asked them, you know, what were their favorite things about the pediatrics, and it was things like the food, the kind nurses and doctors, the colors, the views, the slides. Apparently there's a unit with a slide in it. It's all these bright things, and just because that young person is a little bit older now doesn't mean those things aren't still appealing to them, or at least familiar to them. And then I asked them, okay, so that's what you like about pediatrics. What are words you would then associate with the adults, or what are your fears? And, you know, disgusting food, old people yelling, sharing rooms, the smell, having to share the TV, old people again, it being boring and quiet. So in their mind, they're coming from this really, really bright, supportive, kind environment into this boring space filled with old people that's got no music, that's got no TVs, that's got no games. And they're and I don't blame them. If that's what I thought was going to happen, I wouldn't be too crazy about the idea of moving there either. So it's about kind of letting them take with them what makes them comfortable. If you're not a fan of the tablet, but they calm down when they're playing their games or talking to other people, or let them take it to their appointment just so that they've got a sense of familiarity. Let them wear their headphones so they've got a bit of background music while they're waiting, so that there isn't such a stark contrast between where they've come from and loved to where they're going and they're worried about. I asked the young people themselves what age they think that they should move, and it was a kind of mix between 16 and 18, and that's pretty much on the money, unfortunately. And I answered a question about this yesterday on Facebook. Someone said, what age do they transfer? And it's just not that cut and dry, because there are so many factors to consider. If a young person has got additional learning needs, it might take a little bit longer for them to transition. If a young person is particularly poorly, they might have to transition during that poorly time, because the specialist their care they need is in the adults. If a young person is very, very bright and keen for independence and ready, they might be transitioned a little bit earlier. So there isn't really a specific date. What also isn't ideal is all the different trusts and networks kind of have their own kind of transition plans. So there's not one overall kind of overarching process for the country itself, which makes it more difficult. But what the general rule should be is that the journey starts at 12, with the transition happening by the time they're 18, which I know isn't specific and doesn't help, but it kind of gives you a broad idea. So moving forward, how can parents and guardians support the journey? I'm sure I'm telling you things that you already know, but sometimes it's nice to hear it from an outside perspective, so that you know if you're doing this, it's the right thing as well. So advocation, continuation in a new place. You have been the main advocate for that young person, for your child, their entire life. That doesn't change when they move to the adult services. You can still advocate for them. They need you to advocate for them. It might look a bit different in some instances. It might be that instead of you kind of be the one talking, you could be the one prepping them or empowering them to advocate for themselves. That still is parental advocation. Or it might be in some cases that you say, actually, no, I need to speak up here. They're either giving the wrong information or they don't know, and I've been the person that's been with them. That's absolutely fine. Just try and do that less and less and less, so that it gives a young person time to grow, or space to kind of thrive and grow into independence. And I know that's not easy and it's hard to hear as a parent, but it is the best thing for the young person. Understanding that your fears and their fear might be different, and that's absolutely okay. Both of them are valid. Both of them are genuine fears. But what you consider important isn't necessarily what the young person considers important. Those fears that you saw on the board that we had up a minute ago might not be the same fears that you have as the parent, and that's fine. What I would say is just make sure that just because you don't share their fear doesn't mean that it's not important to them, and it's still something that you support them with. And if you have fears and you have the ability to talk to someone else, it's probably a good idea, so that you don't transfer additional fears onto the young people, which I'm sure you don't do. I just have to say it. Independence, giving more opportunities for independence during clinic. This can be really, really difficult for a parent, not because they want it to be about them, but because it's muscle memory. You have been talking on their behalf for such a long time. It can be really, really difficult to stop doing that and giving them the space to become more independent. It might also be that, you know, you find it hard to let them grow and kind of become an adult, and that is not unusual at all. That's part of being a parent. It's really, really difficult. Totally understand that. But giving space for independence and letting them grow into an empowered young person is the best possible thing that you can do for them. And that's, with you know your child the best, FYI. No one knows your child like you know your child. So ensuring that the information they get is in digestible snippets that are right for them. One young person might be able to understand or take in a lot more information than another. So it's kind of working at the pace that your child is good at, to ensure that they're getting as much information as possible. And then that education, how much do they understand? It's very, very understandable that up until 12, they might not have that much of an education or that much of a understanding of their heart condition, because everyone around them has tried to keep them as happy as possible. And it can be quite a daunting thing to talk about, statistics, to talk about, what the diagnosis is and what it can mean for the future. It's a very unknown space for that young person. So it's completely understandable that there is there could be an unwillingness to kind of offload that onto your child and your young person, sorry. But dropping in bits of education, the more they know about their heart, the better they are equipped to dealing with it and handling it in the day-to-day life. And ensuring that they get that healthy amount of information as they grow means that when they get to adult services and they start to receive more information from those doctors, or the cardiologists, that they're in a position where they're able to receive that in a healthy way and digest it and not spin out from it. So it's about finding what works for each young person. But also, what I haven't put on here, the way that you can really, really support them is by being on the journey with them. One of the number one things that can create or make the journey a little bit more difficult is if the teams at the hospital are also fighting against the parents. I've heard of instances where mothers and fathers have refused to leave the room when they've been asked to, because when the young person wants to talk about something that they don't want their parent to hear, or still answering for them on questions that they're able to answer for, because they want to, they still feel like that they, how to say it in a way that's positive, they still really, really want to make sure that their young person is okay. And because they're the person that has done that for such a long time, there is bound to be nerves about letting go a little bit and letting them take over, because what if something goes wrong? But it is absolutely the best thing for the child to have an introduction into that and the space to do that in a healthy way without taking you out of the circumstance, because you're absolutely still needed and necessary there. And then we look at life outside of the medical journey. So, as we mentioned at the beginning, young people 12 to 18 are going through so many transitions in life. Educationally, at 12, they're in a secondary school now, so they're having to get used to managing their heart condition at a secondary school. Then they have to go through their GCSEs, and they have to go through their exams, and they start getting asked questions about what do you want to be when you're older, as if we're expecting young people to absolutely know that without a shadow of a doubt at such a young age. They're also experiencing changes with their bodies. They might be experiencing attraction and looking into the romantic side of life. Teenagers, I remember when I was a teenager, the only thing I ever thought about was boys or the Backstreet Boys. And those were priorities in my life, and it's no different now. And it's no different when they've got a single ventricle heart. They're still teenagers. But with all these different transitions going on with education, with social aspects, with their body, with all these forward planning situations that they might not be ready to go through, the stress of a hospital transition and transfer can affect behavior. It can affect mental health, and it can affect aspiration in young people. And it's unfortunately something that I support a lot of young people with. Lashing out at home is quite common, because home is their safe space, and if they lash out there, they know they're in a safe way. So lashing out at parents at this time, unfortunately, can definitely happen. Mental health, a lot of our young people struggle with anxiety, and a lot of teenagers and young people generally that are healthy struggle with anxiety and depression, and this is another thing that they have to deal with as well. So it's about supporting them and making sure that their mental health is something that's tracked. And aspiration, they're being told at hospitals what they can and cannot do, hopefully in a really positive way, but they start to look at themselves and compare themselves to their peers at this kind of age. And things like energy, and if places aren't putting in the supportive provisions to make them thrive and achieve to their fullest potential, it's going to impact their aspiration for the future. So they've got so many things going on in their developing brains, that having some sort of lash out on having any affecting behavior is completely necessary. So patience, even though it is challenging at times, is needed and necessary for these young people. You as their parents are their only constant in an ever-changing world. Everything around them is changing. Even their teams are changing, their hospitals are changing, their schools are changing, their bodies are changing, what they're thinking about and what they're enjoying is changing, but you are their constant. And that's why it's so important, not only that the patience is there, but that you're with them on that journey, because you're their anchor through a kind of whirlwind of transition and change. But yeah, so that's transition, and transfer from the hospital sense. I do want to mention as well, something that wasn't put in this presentation. The word transition itself can be a real struggle for young people, because I know what I mean when I say transition, but that's why I always try to add the word hospital transition, because there are certain connotations now associated with transition that weren't necessarily there when I was a teenager. As in, when we hear the word transition, the majority of people, their minds will go straight to gender affirming care, because that is what the word transition is associated with so much in the outer world at the moment. And that's absolutely fine. But young people that aren't going through gender affirming care might shy away from the word transition, because that's not for them. They don't need to transition. They're absolutely fine in the kind of the gender in which they were born in. So it's about looking at the language that we use as well, which is why I will advocate for using the word hospital transition and transfer rather than just transition. And that's what I'm trying to get the different units across the country to start doing as well, just to make sure that we don't alienate the young people before it even starts. But yeah, so that's the kind of presentation about hospital transition and transfer.